I hope everybody enjoyed those great discussions we had earlier today, this morning, and I hope you're looking forward to an afternoon of more of the same. I do just want to remind everybody once again, please keep your audio on mute during the presentations and to use the chat feature to ask any questions of our presenters. Dan?
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our expert panel discussion. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay. I'm Dan Kelly, Assistant Director at CEI, and I'll be moderating this panel discussion. So I'd like to start by kind of quickly going through our panelist list. We have a lot of people who we're going to hear from today. So I'm going to kind of go through the list quickly, and hopefully we can spotlight each person to give them a chance to kind of say hi to the participants. John Wood is Interim Vice Provost for International Education. Welcome, John.
Good afternoon.
Carol Van Zyl Tamsin is Assistant Vice Provost in Educational Effectiveness. Welcome, Carol.
Thanks, Dan, and hello, everyone.
Kelly Ahuna is Director of the Office of Academic Integrity. Welcome, Kelly.
Thank you. Hi, everybody.
Krista Hanipsiak is Assistant Vice Provost in Undergraduate Education. Welcome, Krista. Do we have Krista on? I just want to verify that we have.
Can go on and maybe look for her on the.
Yeah.
Church.
She's here.
Oh, she's here. Okay. My sound is now okay. Well, we will check back in with you when it's time for your remarks, and hopefully your sound is working. Kristen Hart is a Senior Associate Director in Accessibility Resources. Welcome, Christy.
Thank you.
Elizabeth Fellendorf is the Customer Service Manager in IT. Welcome, Beth.
Hello there.
Terry McCormick is Interim Associate University Librarian for Digital Strategy. Welcome, Terry.
Thank you.
And last but not least, Christine Kroll is Assistant Vice Provost and Director of CEI. Welcome, Christine.
Thank you, Dan.
And welcome all. So prior to this discussion, we asked our respective panelists to reflect on a particularly central question relative to today's theme. So I'll kind of repeat exactly what we asked our panelists. What has your respective office or area learned from our past emergency transition to remote learning? And how are you consequently looking ahead to this upcoming fall semester? So we can kind of go down the list here and provide a chance for each of our panelists to address this question respectively. Let's start with John.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to speak to everyone. What I would like to focus on in terms of lessons learned in the international area is three. One, the broad topic of impacts on international students, which is clearly an ongoing concern from both spring and into the fall semester. Our experience with the UB's program in Singapore, which posed some unique challenges and similar ones as well to campus here in Buffalo. And the third area would be the area of study abroad, which, as you'd expect, has been dramatically impacted by the pandemic. I think with respect to international students, there may be some points and observations that will be shared among some of the other panelists and perhaps earlier in the program as well. I do think there's been an upside and a downside. Obviously, the abrupt transition in spring was difficult for all students, and particularly those where access was a particular issue. I'm not sure that that was as much a problem for most of international students, except those who did decide to leave at spring break. Because as we realize, looking ahead to the fall, access is a particular challenge when you're remote in a distant country in a far removed time zone. And I think it will remain an area of concern for us and for the university, how well students can access online courses and be successful if they're dealing particularly or attempting to deal with synchronous arrangements. Even asynchronous courses present a challenge, in part because in some countries, internet access is more of an issue. Accessing Western internet systems and platforms can be a particular challenge. There's a need to rely on virtual private networks and the like. I think one of the upsides that I would highlight, and I've mentioned this elsewhere, is that the online environment has encouraged many international students to feel more comfortable in terms of participation in discussion and exchange activities, group activities broadly writ. I think they've experienced a degree of improved comprehension, particularly in cases where they can review recorded lectures and other materials that are online to make sure that they understand fully from a linguistic point of view what the lecture is about. And so I think that's a general observation. It's not always true, but I do think many international students have reported this advantage in terms of the online environment. So there's an upside and a downside, if you will. Obviously, the loss of physical classroom engagement and campus engagement more broadly is a serious loss in terms of the overall university experience that all students would, I think, regret missing out on, whether it's in the spring or in the fall. For international students, there's also been an issue relating to immigration status and immigration policy. Some of you may have been following that this summer, where there was for a brief time, a new policy from Immigration and Customs Enforcement that required that any international student would need to enroll in at least one in-person or on-campus course. And this threw everyone into a panic because we couldn't be sure that our international students would be able to meet this mandate consistently. And of course, that was retracted by the administration, fortunately. And we're delighted that there's a more flexible arrangement as there had been for the balance of the spring semester when we were dealing with the remote online learning environment. Remains to be seen if there will be new challenges or obstacles in the immigration domain in the future. We can't be sure there won't be, so stand by for that. I know my time is limited, so I do want to get to the other two areas that really come within the international education domain. In our program in Singapore, for those who don't know, UB has been operating for the last 16 years, a group of undergraduate degree programs entirely delivered in Singapore. And we currently have around 1,400 undergraduates enrolled in those programs. Some of those students choose to come on study abroad to UB every year to experience the bigger campus. We had a similar scenario in Singapore in the spring that challenged our whole operation. Their version of the pandemic was somewhat different. They experienced the coronavirus earlier, but didn't have quite the scale of outbreak as we've had here. Nevertheless, the educational institutions were obliged to shut down in a similar manner, slightly later in the case of Singapore than in Buffalo. And we were not in a situation where we had a spring break conveniently scheduled so that we could take the time to transition to online. We had to actually take a pause and spend a week in which we were gearing up our faculty, some of whom were teaching there, of course, live courses from UB. And we also had a variety of other instructional faculty, both local and adjunct teaching in the program. These These folks had to come up to speed very quickly, as we did here. We were fortunate in that taking that week off to reformat our approach allowed some of our experienced faculty who had taught online before to do so and prepare our colleagues who had less experience for that experience going forward. We also were able to refer our faculty in Singapore to the CEI programming that was being ramped up at that time. So I must offer a shout out to CEI for that, because it proved very helpful to our Singapore faculty at the time we made this transition. Some of our faculty decided to leave Singapore at that time, and so they were faced with dealing with a 12-hour time difference once they returned to Buffalo in teaching their students in Singapore. That raised a number of other issues in terms of challenges in teaching, because many of them were still teaching in a synchronous fashion. We have successfully negotiated that transition in Singapore, as we did at UB. I think our students have generally had a positive experience. Again, many of them found that the online courses facilitated comprehension and participation, just as I mentioned earlier. So there were positive sides to the online learning experience there as well as here. I would conclude my remarks by saying a few things about study abroad, the third broad area of interest in our office in terms of this topic of making transitions. As you may know, there was an abrupt cancellation of our spring study abroad programs in March, and a requirement that, at least to the extent they could, some of our study abroad providers shift to remote instruction. Now this obviously it required some special and difficult changes in the way that the program was being delivered. It's clearly not the same as being in country. Our students were hastily returning to the United States where they could, and this took several weeks to be able to manage, but they were then, in most instances, able to work with their partner to continue and complete the courses that they had been enrolled in at the host institution remotely. These were not the same. They were attenuated experiences. They didn't involve engagement in the host culture and with local students, but at least they were able to earn the credits and complete the experience. Many of these students had to undertake return journeys in very risky circumstances. I just note one example. Some of our Singaporean students who were returning for one of our programs in Europe were found to test positive when they arrived in their home country. So it certainly didn't, these students didn't go unaffected by the pandemic. And the travel certainly is one of the issues we're dealing with respect to our fall students as well. And we, as a result of the experience in the spring, have been working with our colleagues in SUNY to try to develop more virtual study abroad options during this hiatus when we can't allow students to travel and participate in study abroad in the normal fashion. So it's really thrown us back on our heels, but we are trying to be creative and innovate as much as we can in terms of offering alternative experiences for our students who want to globally engage and work with partner institutions around the world. And with that, I'll conclude my remarks. Thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you, John, for this perspective from international education. Can we turn now to Carol?
Thank you, Dan. My office was in somewhat of a unique position because we don't directly service students or faculty, but we were charged with collecting data on the student experience and the instructor experience during the COVID emergency. So we conducted 3 surveys of faculty, one right after the first week of remote instruction, one after the 3rd week of remote instruction, and then one at the end of the term. And we collected two surveys from students, one at week 1, one at week 3, and then we did our regular course evaluations at the end of the semester. And I just wanted to hit some highlights. Many of you I've seen in other presentations where we've shared out this data. So this is really just hitting on some highlights that could be important for us to think about as we're doing any part of our instruction in an online setting this fall. So most of our students did not have a lot of experience with online learning, and they did become more comfortable over the course of the semester, but there were still some key subgroups of students who did not feel as comfortable with remote learning, and these are the ones that we would consider to be typically at risk for not returning to campus the following year. So these would be first-generation students, students from underrepresented populations, and students with the greatest financial need. And part of this could be that these were also the same students who were most impacted by a lack of technology. So either inadequate Wi-Fi or devices that could not help them complete their course requirements. So we had about 12 to 15% of students who were experiencing some kind of technological difficulties. I'll just preface up front that these results have been shared broadly across the entire campus. They've been shared with the academic planning committees who were working on the schedule for fall and how we were going to roll fall out. So some changes have been made. For example, in the UBIT help pages for students, there are much more clear guidelines about what technology students should have available to them in order to be able to complete their classes successfully. So we have worked with different units around campus to share these results, and we think that hopefully some changes will be made that will help make things, whatever part of instruction is online in the fall, will make it a little bit easier. Beyond just the technology issues, for our students, staying motivated and engaged was hard. They were relying on the weekly times of coming to class to keep them motivated, to make them do their work. And when they were all on their own at home, it was much harder to keep those commitments. And those who did have synchronous classes did appreciate that because it did give them that accountability that they needed to stay focused. Related to that issue is that many of our students just had a hard time finding a good study space in whatever living environment they went to after the emergency. They were either living with extended family members, younger siblings, older adults they had to take care of. Some of them, their families were insistent that they go back to work. So it was hard for them to find the dedicated time and space for their studying, and they actually felt very pulled in many different ways while they were home. And they missed, just being at campus where they could focus, they could go find a place to study, they could be assured that they would have quiet times or people that they could study with. So that was a big concern as well. And interestingly, as the semester went on, many of our students felt that it became more difficult to communicate with the instructor, to understand what they needed to do to complete their course requirements in an online setting. And they also felt that instructors became less accommodating over time. So I think what that means is that early on, instructors were being very explicit and very clear, explaining how things are going to change, and then assumed that students got it and okay, we can just get on with the business of finishing the semester. But I think many students needed a lot more explicit guidelines throughout the semester. So more reminders, more communications, more explicit instructions. And this also related to the fact that many instructors felt like they were spending a lot more time trying to explain things clearly in the online environment than they would if they were just in a classroom where they could answer questions very easily in a face-to-face setting and not have to make sure that it was typed correctly and students could find whatever they needed to find in their courses and so on. With regard to students, however, I will note, consistent with what John said, we did find that international students, of all the different student groups we looked at, had the best perceived experience, and likely due to those factors that John mentioned, where they felt like they could participate much more easily in a discussion board and language wasn't really an issue. Many of them in class are shy and afraid to speak up, but that's not a factor in a discussion board. And so they actually had a good experience compared to some of the other student groups that we looked at. With regard to our instructors, only about 20% of all of our UB instructors had had any experience teaching online before the emergency. So 80% of the instructors had to use that spring break week, learn the technology, and figure out how they were going to deliver their instruction. So that was a big lift, and I will also give another shout out to CEI for helping them come on board. The libraries and UBIT also helped those faculty, and they appreciated those supports that they got. I will note, however, that a significant number of our faculty members, around 40%, were looking to their colleagues at other institutions for help with, how to teach things online, which is great. We want that cross-pollination. It's great to look to your colleagues who are teaching content similar to yours. But that actually led to some of the confusion, I think, that students were experiencing, because these faculty were listening to colleagues who were using technologies that weren't necessarily supported at UB. So on our survey, we actually had, the known supported technologies at UB that we asked our faculty to rate. And then we had them write in the other technologies that we're using, and we probably had twice as many that were write-ins compared to the ones that we are supporting at UB. So that led to some confusion for students who felt that every course was different and every course was using different technology. So that was a big concern for our students. For some disciplinary areas and areas where objective types of testing are relied on, academic integrity remained a concern throughout the semester. So people who don't rely on, multiple choice tests could figure out ways to assess their students' learning with other methods and feel like cheating wasn't a huge problem. And Kelly may talk about this a little bit when she speaks. But many of our faculty, like for example in engineering and STEM majors who rely a lot on multiple choice exams in the big gateway courses, they felt like they didn't have a good solution for protecting academic integrity even through the end of the semester and even with the tools that UB had. Finally, on the faculty side, accessibility is very important, and faculty were very conscious of not only student access to technology, but also making their materials accessible. And one of the big barriers that faculty had was the fact that it takes so long to edit the transcripts that come out of Panopto recordings, especially when faculty are using scientific terms or they have accents. And so faculty were spending hours and hours and hours editing transcripts for a 5-minute video so that would be completely accessible online. So while there is some good news that the Panopto transcription has improved a little bit, that is still a concern for people who are trying to deliver instruction online to make sure that it is closed captioned properly and it makes sense. Just for to sum up, for overall students and instructors, the comfort with online did improve over time. They found that clear communication in many channels was helpful. So it was helpful to get messages from every level of campus. Even if the message was the same, getting it in multiple places meant that people were going to see it in at least one place. Both our faculty and our students felt that more time was definitely needed to be successful in an online environment, whether it was preparing teaching materials or completing requirements. It just took a lot of time. People were spending a lot of time on their screens. And then finally, everyone missed the interpersonal relationship with their instructors, their students, classmates. That was a big gap that people felt in the spring, as they just didn't feel as connected with people. And I think many people realized for the first time how big that social interaction is in terms of helping a class be successful. So those were some of the things we learned from this spring, and I just wanted to put a little plug in that we're going to be collecting data again this fall. Since we have so many different ways that we're delivering instruction, we want to get some information about how that delivery is working. So we're going to be using some within-term course evaluations to get at the student experience, and we'll also be doing a midterm and an end-of-term faculty survey as well. And we will be sharing out our results periodically as we did through the spring.
Thank you, Carol. And looking at my watch here, I'm realizing that we are burning through our hour pretty quickly. If there is, I don't want to rush anybody, but if there's any way to kind of streamline any of our subsequent remarks, we'd like to try to leave maybe 15 to 20 minutes at least for Q&A. So, you know, if there's any way to kind of streamline the messaging, that would be great. If we can now turn to Kelly Ahuna.
Sure, thank you, Dan. And I can be quick. You had said 2 minutes, so I took that literally. Well, the first thing that I would say is that going to remote instruction in March certainly elevated the importance of academic integrity as central to teaching and learning in all disciplines. You know, the Office of Academic Integrity at UB is only a year old, and I was working hard to make sure people knew we existed and to enforce the message of academic integrity as fundamental to our work. And certainly the pandemic helped me do that. So I think now it's on everyone's radar. As Carol said, it came out in the evaluations from faculty and from students too, who are frustrated, feeling like they're trying to work honestly and they believe that their peers are working dishonestly. So that's the first thing. The second thing I would say is that we have learned, we didn't know this already, that when left on their own without clear guidance and thinking that everyone around them is cheating, students will cheat. When they're alone in their bedroom and they're taking a test on their computer and they don't know the answer to something and they think they can look it up and nobody will know, that temptation has proven to be too much for lots of students. So especially I would say when they know their course is graded on a curve and they feel like they're in competition with other people. So by doing the right thing and not cheating, they feel like they might be hurting themselves. So we have found that that is true. Students will cheat. On the positive side, I would say there's lots that instructors can do to deter this. And I just happened to be doing a website revision anyway this summer, but given what's happened since March, my website revision I think is excellent now. There's all kinds of information for instructors under an instructor tab with many, many best practices that can be borrowed. But just a couple of things I would echo that have already been said. Alternative assessment is an excellent choice. Objective testing in an online, unproctored way is just not secure. So if you can think of alternative assessments for students that are not in the objective format, that's always helpful. And then helping students understand the meaning of assessments, why it's important that they know these things, how they're attached to real life and to their goals. We know that when students see value in an assessment, they're less likely to cheat. But sometimes they don't see the direct correlation between the assessment and the value. Providing the best clear directions and instructions you can apply as instructors to what is allowed and what is not allowed. Students access a lot of unauthorized resources thinking, well, because it was open book and open notes, it was open world, and they could go to any website and do anything they wanted. So the more clear you could be about that, the better. And then, you know, we do have good tools at our disposal through UB Learn's Lockdown Browser and Respondus Monitor that instructors can use to apply some monitoring of test taking. And we can talk more at length about those later if people have questions. I've been leading an RFP committee. Some people in that committee are also on this meeting, looking to procure a live online proctor option for those high stake tests where we really can't find another option that would work as well as a live proctor. So those are just some comments, and I'm happy to take questions later. Thanks.
Thank you, Kelly. It looks like we've got the resolution to the sound issues for Krista. Is that, are you a go?
I hope so. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent.
Right, thank you.
And I can be speedy as well. Carol Van Ziel-Tamsen stole lots of my thunder, but that's just because we work so closely together. And so the Office of the Dean of Undergraduate Education responds to many student concerns. And so we heard directly through our office, through the provost or the president's office, through the vice provost for academic affairs office, many of the student stress points that Carol already went through. In terms of the increased perception, at least, of increased workload, email overload, the difficulty of shifting between the very many different platforms that faculty were using, screen burnout, etc. And so I guess I'll focus more, instead of telling you about those things, since you've already heard it, more about the looking ahead, and maybe just a couple of different tips. And so I think flexibility with your students and showing empathy is going to be really key. The faculty who we saw do that were most successful in keeping down student concerns from raising to the level of our offices. And, you know, students are dealing with the same stresses that our faculty are dealing with in their lives. And so just remembering that, I think helps put into perspective the stressors that come up in their lives that, you know, they may not have a written excuse for needing to have their attendance not docked for a given day. So just being mindful of those sorts of things. In anticipation of some of the concerns that we heard in the spring, Academic Affairs put together some best practice information that was sent out to faculty last Monday. And so just a couple of highlights from that I would reiterate is that all that you can do to make your syllabus available now for students so they can better plan and make adjustments to their schedules today, as opposed to the first week of classes when they realize that they may not be able to accommodate a synchronous, you know, whatever the schedule is for the class, however it's being delivered, being very clear on your instructional mode and what that's going to mean for a student so that they can plan for having that quiet space, plan for making sure that their internet is not going to be stolen by another family member who also is going to need to have heavy Zoom access or whatever at the same time. And I think it will lead to greater student success if they can make those adjustments now rather than scrambling in the first week of classes. The other thing is that the registrar's office is working on making centrally scheduled classrooms that are too small to seat courses available as touchdown spaces for students. And that sort of is addressing that quiet study space problem that we did hear from our students. And the other thing is that we developed some recommended syllabus language that we pointed both to the undergraduate education and the graduate school websites. One on attendance. So this one is particularly important to help make sure that we can enforce the public health guidelines. Students may not be able to furnish a note saying that they're ill or they have a reason for which they cannot attend class. And so wanting faculty to be flexible and mindful of that. We did also include some of that technology recommendation information. And then finally, I'll just reiterate one other thing that Carol had mentioned, and that is making the implicit very explicit. I think that if you don't normally go through your syllabus, this is a semester to do so, to make sure that students understand, in particular, all the assessment expectations, the best way to contact you if they have questions, problems, and making sure that they understand where they will find the information to access lecture notes or whatever it is for each component of your course. So I'll just end there.
Thank you so much. Next, we can turn to Kristen.
Hi, thank you very much. So a lot of the things that we had mentioned, or that I was going to bring up today, have been mentioned, because I think one of the silver linings of all of this is our office has been able to connect more with offices like Kelly's and Krista's to look at accommodations, you know, from an access standpoint of view, but also to make sure that we are paying attention and being sensitive to the academic integrity and trying to balance those two. We've always done accommodations for online courses. This really just kicked it up a notch with the volume and coaching accessibility through this online mechanism, which was already touched upon as new for about 80% of our faculty. So some of the things that we had learned is looking at lockdown browsers, and sometimes that barred some of our students from accessing, being able to read the actual test, because the software that they needed for like your visually impaired and your hearing impaired students, they couldn't see what was being displayed because their software was disabled. So some improvements have been made by those companies, but there's still some ways to go on that. So that's always something to be aware of. And backtracking with testing was also something that came up quite frequently, especially when you had questions that maybe were related to each other with several parts, that with some of our students with cognition and memory, you know, the strategies that they have been taught since elementary school is to use the context of the clues around the questions they had. So it was working with instructors and our students to how do we work with that, and sometimes maybe even needing to make an accommodation for that, to have that key feature turned on for that particular student. When working with Panopto, it's great. They've got a lot of great different features. It's a matter of turning them on. So, so once again, the backtracking, looking at that captioning, which Carol had mentioned that it does take some time sometimes to go through and edit those caption videos, because the accuracy is about 85% of grabbing that. And really where we look at sometimes is the expertise of the instructor for them to look at those key terms that really make or break the understanding of, you know, of a concept, and making sure those terms were accurate. So, you know, there are resources available too that we can work together, I think, as we move forward on that. But even just turning on the captioning is huge for not only students with disabilities, but we have found for many learners to be able to have that feedback while they're learning. One of the other things we've looked at too is in UB Learns is paying attention to Ally. So the university has invested in Ally. What Ally is doing, if you're not familiar, it is looking at the content that you are posting, so your articles, your readings that you may have, and looking to see what is the accessibility of those items. And it has sort of a stoplight feature, right? So green is good, yellow, there's some errors that need to be fixed, and red, you know, is really to the point where it may not actually be readable. And we run into those issues too, because if something is unreadable, even with our software that we have, if it is a copy of somebody that you took a class with in 1973, and it's smudged and marked up, even the greatest software can't decipher everything for our students to be able to access that. So what we're looking at is if you're building courses and you're posting items, to put the clearest print as possible, as accessible as possible, for all students, so they don't have to squint and contort the file to be able to actually read what you want them to read. And I would encourage, you know, using the Ally training, which I believe is on Mark Greenfield's website. So making the most benefits of that, and we can be partners in helping you understand, you know, what are some next steps with that as well. So, you know, with all that, you know, being said, I really appreciate being here today to work with such fine people, and just to reiterate a lot of the things that people have already said as we move forward, that we are in this together as we navigate this. But I think being clear with our students and having an understanding that some of us may have learned one or two new platforms, one of the biggest things that students have mentioned is they may have 5 different classes and 5 different platforms that they had to learn this March. So I think the more consistent we can be, the more direct we can be, which I know is not always possible, but it is definitely key, especially to students with disabilities, to know what those expectations and deadlines are, so we can help navigate the other part of the disability. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen. Can we turn now to Beth?
Yes, thanks, Dan. So I'm with UBIT, and we were lucky, I guess, in that well before March, we'd been researching and prototyping ways to add synchronous video conferencing capabilities to more classrooms. So we were really in a good position to present the possibilities to campus leadership. We were also able to stretch our budget by creating 3 levels of capability. So we have classrooms now labeled as good, better, and best. So the best rooms are those that already had a standalone Panopto recording appliance in them for scheduled recordings and live streams. And several of those rooms needed a camera, which we added. And we also made sure that each one has at least 1 or 2 handheld microphones in addition to the instructor's lapel microphone. So these rooms tend to be larger places, 50 or more seats. We also outfitted smaller classrooms with a steerable camera at the back and a tabletop microphone. That makes them ready for do-it-yourself recording or synchronous video conferencing on the internal PC. And these are the better rooms. And the good rooms are our standard technology classrooms where you can bring in a webcam and plug it into the internal PC and do your own recording or connecting with students or guests. So of the 57 centrally scheduled classrooms in use for the fall, about 96% of them are in that better or best category. And our IT communications team has put together some great short videos showing how to use Zoom or WebEx or Panopto utilizing this new technology in classrooms. We'll also have about 100 cameras with tripods available for faculty to borrow, and we're working out that loan process right now. So it would be interesting to hear from you, your thoughts on, how we shape that service, if, what the loan period should be for a webcam and tripod, that sort of thing. One thing that we learned early on is that it takes a village to train a village. And we needed to partner with our allies in CEI, the libraries, the Educational Design Collaborative, and IT support experts within the schools to make this huge pivot and bring everybody up to speed. And it was really interesting to hear Wendy Quinton talk about, sort of collaborating with her colleagues and everybody going off to learn a different piece and sort of training the trainer and bringing that back and sharing that. Because I know we and CEI reached hundreds of people, but we couldn't hit everybody. So to help address that, in early April, Bryce Bible, who's our VP CIO, launched the Online Instructional Technology Solutions Committee. And we're really pleased that so many people from across the disciplines have joined together to collaborate on training resources and preparations for fall 2020. And one outcome of that is the Teach Anywhere website, which is a great gathering place for resources for faculty. Looking forward, this summer, we've hosted many online trainings for Zoom and Panopto, and we have a couple more coming up this week. We're fortunate that we have some people from CEI and also the decanal units who are joining us on those to help answer questions and to give some different perspectives about the pedagogy. And then this fall, we're also going to be partnering with the educational services team in the libraries to continue a program of training sessions throughout the fall semester. And in addition to videos on our website, we're also providing in-person training sessions on the technology in classrooms. We had one session last week, and then next Wednesday, the 26th, we're going to have drop-in hours when folks can try out the technology with a classroom specialist on hand to answer questions. So we're asking you to register for that by going to the Teach Anywhere website, which maybe someone can put in the chat, and just look under the help resources for the in-class technology open house. And we need people to register just so we can comply with social distancing. And we're also looking for feedback. We are thinking about possibly running a session from a classroom where you would be able to join in as if you were a student in the class and kind of see the experience from their point of view. So if you think that would be interesting, you can let us know. And I would say that one of the greatest challenges in spring was the volume of calls that we had from faculty who suddenly needed to use these tools for online learning. And we were able to shift a couple of people in the department to help answer some of those questions and triage some others. And we are going to have those staffing additions in place for the fall startup as well. And since we're running short on time, I will stop there.
All right, thank you, Beth. Let's turn now to Terry.
Thank you. I'll be brief. Before I accepted my current job in the university libraries, I was the head of public services and IT in the law school. So during the crisis, that was my position in managing teaching and learning, as well as supporting the staff online. I'm not going to emphasize all of the technical things that were discussed, because all of those things are in fact true. The various issues that came up, we also suffered through those. But I will say, as far going back to what Dan said earlier, what did we learn? What did we take away? And one of the things I think that my group learned is that 20% of what we did was technically oriented as far as IT or AV or online support. The other 80% was building trust, promoting the work of the faculty, letting them know that they could do this regardless of the situation, and helping the students through this process. One of the most important things that we learned, or that we kind of knew going into this, was number one, listen to the faculty. Try and understand and appreciate their learning outcomes. What do they want to accomplish? And understand that coming from a law school, you know, law schools have had the same model of teaching the case method since the 1870s, since Christopher Columbus Langdell invented it at that time. And a lot of faculty, a lot of teaching is still based on that model. And we took that in a matter of 2 weeks and went online with it. So there were a lot of questions, there were a lot of concerns on how we were going to do this and do it effectively. But we worked with the faculty, we listened to their problems, and we talked them through it. We had a live Zoom chat line that was running constantly 8 hours a day, where faculty would call us and ask, how do we do this? How can we do this better? I want to teach them that. And I have to say that most of the sessions were more like therapy sessions than they were actually technology sessions. And we managed to get through this together, but it's very important to have empathy for the faculty, what they're trying to do, and understand where they're coming from to make this successful. You know, again, and Beth said it best, that we in the law school did tap our allies. We tapped them in CEI, we tapped them in UBIT, and we tapped our colleagues across the university libraries to bring training together to make this successful. The other component too is to listen to the students. The students, some of them were suffering through various types of problems. We had students calling in actually crying, and we had to work with them and let them know we're going to make this work. We will talk to the registrar's office. We're going to talk to them about getting your exam or your paper in on time. And we just went the extra mile to make sure that their challenge was resolved as effectively as possible. So this kind of social work was critical, I think, overall to the success of achieving this. And we extended it too with the incoming students that are going to start in the fall, in a week. You know, we participated, the IT folks, the AV folks, and the library folks participated on the first year orientation of the accepted students in the law school. And we answered all of their questions, how the fall semester is going to look, how online is going to look, how hybrid is going to look. And we reassured them that we were going to be there for them to assist them if they had any problems. So I think a lot of this went a long way into giving us an incoming class that is the size or better than the size of what we received in the past for the law school. So I will end it there because we're short on time.
Thank you very much, Terry. And so we heard from our fearless leader, Christine Kroll, earlier this morning. Christine, anything that you wanted to add or perhaps emphasize based on your remarks this morning?
In less than 60 seconds, I just wanted to say that pretty much everybody has already stolen my thunder, which is great because we do all work closely together. But I did want to emphasize for those of you that do have time to kind of circle back around either in the fall semester or winter session, moving on, that you may not know that over the last year or so, people on my staff, CEI research and development team, have created a curriculum for faculty. And that's allowing us to not only offer on-campus teaching academies, which we did in 2019, and now we're solely focused on on-campus and now online teaching academies. But if you commit to this experience, it's 12 hours, but you're going to meet other faculty during that experience. You're going to learn how to make your course and really do everything from a course plan, working with our learning design team. And I think it's just been, it's been very transformative for a lot of our faculty that have already taken it. So I encourage you to talk to people who have been through it. As we get past this big bubble, we're going to be able to put a lot of the testimonials and share with you what your colleagues have said across the university. But it's a really great opportunity to look at something that's homegrown at UB and really working with everybody else at the university that's an instructional support has been tremendous this summer. And I feel like we're in a really great spot now to move forward with a shared curriculum and try to work above that and integrating our instructional tools as well as our UB Learn support team is on the CEI team. So I just want the faculty to know that the staff, we are working really hard and we are working together for you and for the students. And as a capper to what everybody else said, during those emergency sessions that we delivered, if it weren't for volunteers, which included retired faculty that were over 70 years old, that were in the age group that were really susceptible to COVID, came during March to help our faculty because they had experience in teaching in UB Learns and things like that, from people from the units, from the libraries. It was really, to me, the most transformative time I've ever had in my 20 plus years at UB was from March forward. So what we can't offer yet is because of the number of people we have, but we are all trying, and I have not met one person that isn't really trying to help the faculty deliver the best that you can for our students. So that's kind of, oh, and one more quick thing. The unsung hero to me of COVID was the plain old whiteboard. I had so many people from different offices come in and whiteboard what they were doing, and we whiteboarded what we were doing. And so to me, that was really exciting to just get in there and figure out where can we get rid of the overlaps and really optimize what we can do with the faculty. And the last thing is our exemplar faculty, people who have been through the academies or have done a great job, they actually came to the training as well to learn what we were doing at the emergency sessions and then bring it back to their schools. So I want to thank all the faculty that were just as integral as all of the staff in supporting everybody that we could. So that's it.
Thank you, Christine, and thank you, everybody. So we are almost out of time, but as we all are learning about this remote transition here, one of the interesting things that happened was we had a lot of questions come in via chat, but if I'm not mistaken, a lot of them were resolved via the work going on behind the scenes, which is something in the planning process we didn't really anticipate. So we have our learning designers on hand, two of them, Michelle Connolly and Maggie Grady, who were going to kind of manage the Q&A process. But given that we're kind of short on time here, I'm wondering, Michelle and Maggie, if you can kind of go through some of the questions that were asked and kind of summarize for the group, attending here, how they were resolved and, where that information is, and just kind of provide an overview of the Q&A that kind of already worked itself out.
I guess I'm quicker to the button. Okay, so there's a lot of questions that have been asked in here that some of that information is found on the Teach Anywhere site, which has been a really great collaboration between so many of the units on campus now. I think that a lot of things have been answered in here about the syllabi, some of the information to put that together. UB Learns, if you haven't been in there recently, and Mark kind of addressed some things in there, if you haven't checked into UB Learns recently, log into that. And as soon as you log in, you'll see that there is a link in there for you to set up your course if you haven't enabled it already. And that will help you to get your courses populated. Trying to see what other questions are in here. I think there's a lot of information that's really been really well distributed now through so many different channels that you've been part of, Dan. So I don't really have much else to say with that.
Sure. I'll just add then that, so we have a lot of information for everybody in the chat feature in terms of, how these various questions were addressed. And I guess I'll close things then here for our hour that we have by one, I really want to thank our expert panel here. I mean, this group represents, an enterprise that is multidimensional, that's working on these problems from so many different areas. But one point I want to bring up is Krista brought up a particularly important part, or an important issue here, that one of the things we need to keep on our minds is to always have flexibility and empathy with our students. And I think that kind of speaks to everything that, all our presenters here, our panelists, have touched on. And that is, we're in such a, kind of a crazy situation here. We're all learning, and our students are kind of caught in the middle of this whole crazy process. So as we leave this panel discussion, I thought that might be a kind of a good reminder for, as we go off our respective ways, a kind of maybe a lesson to take from this and from our presenters, that the students are the ones who we're ultimately here for, and kind of that to always have that in the back of our minds, when we're doing our various administrative work and academic work. So without further ado, thank you everybody for a great discussion here today. Any further questions, please feel free to submit them in the chat feature. You can always reach out to us at CEI, and I'll turn it back over to John.